I'm going to turn it over to the Auditor General and her staff. We're welcoming and pleased to have her down from Phoenix, Debra Davenport. She's the State Auditor General. So, Debbie, I'll turn it over to you. And we have Zsorey, who I would assume is your Financial Audit Director, and be giving the report. And then we also have Keith Dahmer, who was kind of involved in, I know, talking with our staff quite often and did a lot of work on this particular project. And he, I think, even attended one of the meetings of the bond committee and basically said that they're hard at work, and he didn't tell them a thing. So that's good. Debra, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chuck. And before I turn it over to Zsorey, who will be doing the presentation, I just wanted to take this opportunity to let the board members know that this was a very good experience for us. The county was very cooperative in helping us with the records. It was a long process. I've heard some people tell me a little bit too long. The statute required that the report be out by February 1, which it made that deadline. But now with the report being issued, you all can move forward and make the decisions that you need to make. But I did want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the county and the staff that helped us prepare this report and get through the records. They were very cooperative, and we appreciate that. Zsorey and his team, Keith Dahmer, they worked on this report for the last 6 months, trying to hit all of the areas that the statute required us to look at, and he's ready today to give you a presentation on the results of that work. Thank you.
Well, my introductions have been stolen here. But I also wanted to point out Jamie Martin, who also, she was a senior on the project, and Andy Welch, who was a senior on the project too, worked really hard to get the audit done. Thank you for inviting us down. It's a gorgeous afternoon here in Tucson. Okay.
I'm just going to get you a little more
closer.
There you go.
Cool.
Perfect.
Okay. I wanted to start off, Keith, if you go to the first slide. In statute, the law required us to look at 7 specific areas on Pima County's general obligation bond program. I'm not going to go over those areas right now. They're in the introduction of the report. But as I go through my presentation here, I'll touch on the various areas that the audit did require us to cover, and we did make sure that we covered each one of those areas and answered every one of the questions that was in the legislation. Keith, if you want to go next slide. Okay, what we found is the county administers a unique general obligation bond program. And when I say unique, we compared the program to other counties in Arizona and didn't find a similar program. And we also looked nationwide at other counties within the country to see if we could find a similar program, and we did not. Most jurisdictions, what they do is when they issue general obligation bonds, they're issuing bonds just for the purposes of that jurisdiction. In other words, if they want to build a county jail or some other county building or for a county regional park, they're issuing bonds for just that jurisdiction. In Arizona, there's very few counties that actually issue general obligation bonds. Right now, only Apache and Yuma County issue general obligation bonds, and they've done it for their county library districts to provide funding for those districts. So it is unique in Pima County that when general obligation bonds are issued, it also is coordinated with the local governments, with the cities and towns within the county and tribes within the county too, to fund projects that not only are for county purposes, but for purposes of those local jurisdictions. Recreational centers and parks in the town of Moran or a city of Tucson, and generally we don't see that, so that does make it unique. The other thing that makes it unique too is just the amount of coordination that requires, because the county is issuing debt that's funding projects throughout the county for local jurisdictions in the county itself, so there's a lot of coordination that occurs between the county, the local jurisdictions, and the Bond Advisory Committee. I'm going to talk about the Bond Advisory Committee here in a couple minutes. So Keith, if you want to go to the next slide. How the process works is there's a 3-phase process in this program. And the first is planning for the issuance of the debt. And during that process, the communities, could be cities and towns, citizens within the communities, citizen groups within the communities are coming forward and submitting ideas for projects to Pima County that would be funded with general obligation bond monies. What happens with that is the Bond Advisory Committee goes through all those projects, evaluates the public benefit of the project, and also looks at the costs of the project too, to try and come up with a final list of projects that are going to move forward. And the bond advisory committee will vote on that list, and then it goes over to the board of supervisors. What we did see was the number of projects that are submitted always outstrips the bonding capacity of the county. So there has to be tough decisions made when they're coming down to that final list. So like I said, they are looking at the public benefit of the projects to try and come up with that final list. The county then, board of supervisors, will approve this list of projects that is approved by the bond advisory committee and vote a bond authorization to have an election to issue general obligation bonds. The voters then get to vote on that election. And what they're voting on when they're voting on these bond programs is not the specific projects or the timing of those projects. What they're voting on are purposes. So let's say $50 million to build parks, $75 million for flood control, $100 million for public safety. So there's broad purposes that the voters are voting on, and there's individual projects that have been approved by the bond advisory committee in the county that underlie each one of those purposes. The final phase is the project monitoring. And how that happens depends on the nature of the projects. Certain projects, let's say if it's a park in a city or a town, that local jurisdiction is very involved in monitoring the project, making sure it's going okay. If there's any changes that need to be made in the project, they propose those changes. It goes forth to the bond advisory committee who would approve those changes, and then to the board of supervisors would also approve the changes. If it's a county-wide project or a county primarily project, then the county is involved in monitoring the project, proposing any changes to the bond advisory committee, up to the board of supervisors to approve those changes. So that quickly is how the process works within Pima County to administer this, like I said, very collaborative process. Keith, if you want to go next slide. I want to talk for a minute about the Pima County Bond Advisory Committee. I believe there's 10 members here today. It's comprised of 25 members. 15 of those members are appointed by the board of supervisors. Each board member appoints 3 members to the committee. 7 of the members are from the local jurisdictions, and 3 of the members are appointed by the county administrator. And as it says, the committee is responsible for reviewing projects, making project funding determinations, and funding recommendations to the board of supervisors, and those are ultimately approved by the board of supervisors. And again, that is unique to have that committee there. Most of the jurisdictions we see, that's all just happening at the board of supervisors level because they're administering these projects on their own. Keith? First table I want to go over with you, and this is just to show you what the bond programs look like, the 1997, 2004, and 2006 bond programs. What the voters voted on was, let's say for 1997, a good example, is parks, $53 million for parks, $22 million for flood control. For 2004, $184 million for public safety, and for 2006, $36 million for a psychiatric hospital. Total of $893 million worth of projects that the voters have approved. Now, these projects don't all happen at one time. These projects occur over a period of time. The county tries to issue debt over a period of time to keep the tax rate, secondary property tax rate, relatively stable over that period of time. And that's not unusual when I looked at other bonding programs, large general obligation bonding programs. For example, like at a county or a college, they'll get authorization from the voters to maybe do $1 billion worth of projects. Those projects may be done over a 10 or 15-year period. And so they're issuing bonds slowly over time. They don't go out and issue $1 billion worth of bonds as soon as the approval occurs. The projects happen slowly over time, and they time the issuance of the bonds with the needs for the projects, the funding for the projects. What we found was the bond proceeds were spent for purposes authorized by the county voters. And so in the last slide, it showed you what the purposes were that the county voters had approved. We found that the proceeds were in fact being spent for those purposes. In every instance, we found no exceptions to that. That the bond proceeds are also spent on projects that were approved by the bond advisory committee and the county board of supervisors. So we didn't find any problem with that either. We also found that the county completed most of the projects on time. 93% of the projects were completed on time. And as I mentioned, that timing is determined by the county and the bond advisory committee. So we didn't find any issues there. And if the changes in the project cost or timing were properly approved by the bond advisory committee, approved by the county board of supervisors, and were made without bias. And I have some slides, I'll talk about each one of these points. This is a table from the report, and what it's showing you as I mentioned earlier about the voters approving purposes. And what it's showing you is the amount that the voters approve for each purpose, for each bond offering, and the amount that's been spent through May 2012, the amount that was planned, and the amount that was unallocated. And what we were looking for there was, again, to make sure the county was using the monies as the voters intended. If there was intended to build parks, that they were in fact building parks with those monies. And that is what we found. And so, like I had mentioned, there's $893 million worth of projects. Not all the bonds have been issued at this point. The projects are still ongoing. So there'll have to be a final accounting at some point in the future by the county to, close out the books on each one of these bond projects. This is another table from the report, and let me tell you the page numbers on some of these to help you out. The last one was from page 12. This is page 13 of the report. And what we're showing you here is the number of completed projects through November of 2012, or through May of 2012, excuse me. There was 513 completed projects, 477 of them were completed on time, and 36 were completed late. So that's where we came up with the 93% of projects being completed on time. And it also shows you dollars in there too, the dollar value of the projects being completed on time. $616 million were completed on time in terms of dollar value of projects. We looked at every change that was made to a project in terms of funding or timing. And there were a total of 256 changes made. So we went back and examined the Board of Supervisors minutes for every single change and analyzed the reasons for those changes to make sure there was a legitimate reason why there was a change made to a project. And what we found is that the changes basically occurred for 4 reasons. First was that the projects may not have been fully designed or planned when the bond program was approved. And so there needed to be some more planning, some more design before they could move forward with a project. And like I said, they'll plan projects as they're ready to go and then issue the debt as it's needed. Another thing that we found is during the construction of projects, there might have been historic or environmental concerns that were identified that could have delayed a project and caused it to maybe be more expensive or run longer. The third thing that we found was many bond projects are not funded solely with bond monies. There could be other monies that are used to fund a bond project. For example, there could be federal grant dollars that are used in addition to bond dollars to fund a project. Sometimes the timing of that money is uncertain. You don't know exactly when you're going to get it, so it could have been delayed. Sometimes the amount of money you expected to receive may not happen. It could be less than that. And that'll also cause changes in projects. And the final reason that we found was when the county was looking to purchase real property, sometimes they couldn't always purchase the real property that they had planned to purchase. And so that could cause delays in terms of identifying alternate sites for a project. So those were the 4 primary reasons that we found for changes, and those all appeared to us to be legitimate reasons for changing the cost or timing of a project. Another thing that the law asked us to do was to evaluate the projects in terms of how they were spread across the county and the value that taxpayers were receiving for the projects that were completed in their area. And I do want to mention at this point, when the Bond Advisory Committee is going through and approving projects, they're not trying to match projects with tax dollars coming in to ensure there's an equitable distribution so that each jurisdiction gets the exact amount of dollar of projects as they're going to pay in taxes. They're looking at trying to identify those projects that have the greatest community benefit, and that's what's driving them in their decisions. So you're never going to see a perfect match between taxes paid and projects delivered the way the program is administered. And so what we found was that the county did, have complete projects that had a county-wide and local benefit, and generally the projects approximated the taxes paid by each jurisdiction. I mean, like I said, it's not going to be a perfect match. The unincorporated areas paid more in taxes than they got in projects. The city of Tucson got more in projects than paid in taxes. The smaller governments, Oro Valley, Marana, Sahuarita, generally paid approximately the same amount in taxes as they got in projects. But again, I want to emphasize it's really, they weren't really trying to do that. That really more just worked out that way as they went through the process. For those of you who don't have a copy of the report, it is available on our website. You can download it. It's a PDF copy. We also have a few extra copies with us here today if you'd like a copy of the report. It's www.azauditor.gov, and it's right on the front page of our website right now. Very easy to find. Just a real brief presentation. I walked you through a lot of information, and if 5 or 10 minutes here. Do you have any questions? Oh, sorry.
I think I have two questions.
Sure.
The first, in your experience and in your knowledge, Ms. Davenport, has the legislature ever required your office to do an audit of a jurisdiction?
For those of you that couldn't hear, he asked if the legislature has ever asked us to do an audit of jurisdiction before, and yes, that happens quite often. Well, not quite often, but it does happen. As a matter of fact, we've been down here before for some transportation bonds. I want to say maybe about 6 or 7 years ago.
10, 15.
Oh, he says 10 or 15. That tells you how old I am.
It's been a little while.
It's been a while, I guess. So, yeah, from time to time, they do ask us to go to other jurisdictions and take a look at some specific area.
The second question is, do you have an estimate on how much this audit cost and where does that money come from?
The audit itself was funded through the general fund to my office. We get a lump sum appropriation, and the legislature determines either by law or by statute that's already in existence which pieces of work we do in any given year. So for example, my office is required to do the financial audits of all the counties, Pima County included, but the general fund appropriation that I receive pays for the audits of that. So we didn't receive a specific appropriation for this piece of work. It was included in the general fund appropriation.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I checked yesterday as to when I was first appointed to the bond committee, and I was appointed in 2003 by the town of Marana. So I knew from personal experience, having served that length of time, that the allegations that were raised by certain town officials in the town were specious and bogus and totally unfair, particularly the allegations that were made to members of the bond committee itself. Particularly since none of the town officials had ever communicated to me as their representative concerning these complaints that they had, which they went directly to the legislature. And I heard the new representative for the town saying he's proud to represent the town of Marana, and I was proud to represent the town of Marana also. But I certainly was not proud of the way those allegations were handled and just set off into midair without any substantiation or any proof of the allegations that were being made. My question is this, finally. Does the Auditor General have any executive discretion in what audits she is about to embark on, or you simply just serve at the mandate of the legislature? If you're asked to create an audit or perform an audit, and there's absolutely no validation made for any of the allegations creating the alleged need for the audit, do you have any discretion whatsoever not to proceed?
The Office of the Auditor General receives mandates for audits in several different ways. This particular piece of work came to us via a bill, a legislative bill that was passed by the House, by the Senate, and signed by the governor. So in this particular case, no, I have absolutely no say in taking a look at that.
So they were all fooled also.
I can't comment on what was happening in their minds. All I can tell you is...
As a result of the audit that they were. Thank you.
I have a question, and actually the question's probably for Chuck or Nicole.
It's going the wrong way.
Just gotta hike around.
Chuck, you don't have to hide anymore. You can come out. I don't remember the exact number, but I think you've presented a very good picture of how the bond committee functions vis-a-vis the process. But these bonds in 2004 and 2006 passed by almost 60% of the votes cast, which is a pretty remarkable percentage considering typical elections. And I think one of the reasons is because of the amount of work that was done with the public in explaining the benefits of each project. Do you recall offhand how many meetings and subcommittee meetings we've had since the bond program got underway in 2004? And that's the reason I said.
I'd say it's probably 500? No, 50 bond committee meetings, yeah. But I mean, when you talk about subcommittee meetings and other public meetings, it's literally hundreds of meetings. Hundreds of meetings.
And these meetings were held throughout the county?
They were held, yeah, throughout the county, and there was a lot of feedback, and the committee actually said, you know, go out and get, you know, feedback from individuals geographically dispersed throughout the community, and that's what a lot of those what we call subcommittee meetings or just simply informational meetings were when we were formulating the program for the Bond Advisory Committee's consideration.
I wanted to know if there were any sponsors of the bill here today so that they could see the results of the audit.
I don't think so, but I think you know, the issue is it is what it is, and so I think what I'm kind of appreciative of is that, as the committee said way back when this legislation was first passed, we cannot move forward with considering a new bond issue until these questions that have been raised have been answered, and they've been answered. And so I think that's good, and it's an independent validation. It's not as if we're basically telling everybody how good we are. We're actually having an independent third party, the state, come in and do what they do, and that's audit. And we've been on the receiving end of audits from the Auditor General that are not nearly as good, but that's life, and that's what it is. And the whole purpose is to try and improve what you do the next time. And this is kind of also a lesson for us, because it helps us know what's important and what's important to the community at large when we're doing bonds and incurring the debt and repaying the debt, and what good does it do. And so what the Auditor General has formed for us is a very solid basis of a financial review audit of what's happened in the bond programs of 4, 6, and 1997. And what we're going to talk about just in a minute is how to follow up on that in what we call kind of a performance audit. One of the members, Terry, asked at the last meeting about, can we have an idea how well these projects are doing? Are they meeting the need? Are they being maintained? Who's doing what? And so we are now in the middle of a performance audit discussion that I'll give you a few sheets that we've done as examples to talk about. Do you want to see anything else? So that's, I think this whole exercise has been very worthwhile.
Sure. One other, it was an oversight. At the time that this audit started, the Board of Supervisors appointed an independent committee of interested parties to sort of oversee the process and work with the Auditor General if necessary to make sure that you were getting the information you needed. I noticed there were at least 2 members of that group here today. I think Bruce and
yeah, Bruce Dusenberry, who is the about outgoing president of the Chamber of Commerce, sitting next to Kurt Wallington, who is the incoming president of the Chamber of Commerce, and Ron Schutman in the back. And that committee was never needed because I think the concern that the staff had and I think the board had in forming that committee is to make sure there's no insulation of the data from the Auditor General, that it all basically gets out there and there's no effort to, you know, either massage it, hide it, or not give it. And that was never our intent. And I think from day one we provided information, and probably too much information. And it was basically the previous accountability that the bond committee had insisted on in those semi-annual bond reports, to where, you know, you always were talking to us about, why do we have to read another 500 pages of information, project data sheets on every project? And that was the purpose. That formed that really solid historical foundation for what we had done and spent the money on. And all of those documents were shipped off to the Auditor General, and then, you know, and I know they did. They looked at the minutes of every board meeting where an amendment occurred. And so this was a very thorough task, accomplishment. Yes?
Mr. Huckleberry and Michael Rossi, I represent touching on, last year during the adoption of this law, there was an enormous amount of discussion of the debt per capita in Pima County. And I think the Auditor General's report has highlighted the unique nature of the county bond program, that it captures both municipal and unincorporated county needs. And so if you look at that debt per capita, you actually have to compare the county bond program to the combined county and municipal debt in other jurisdictions. So I'd ask you, just as someone representing the county that had to deal with this issue significantly at the state legislature, where many, many representations were made, to touch on that issue of debt per capita, because I think the conclusions really highlight some of the advantages of this kind of program.
Yes, when we first heard the whole discussion about debt per capita and how Pima County was the most indebted county in Arizona, it kind of raised some questions in our own mind about what we were doing. We basically then, we submit an annual report to the Department of Administration, which is our aggregate, outstanding debt as of the stroke of midnight of, June 30th every year. New debt issued, new debt retired, all different classes, whether it's general obligation, revenue bonds, or certificates of participation. And we had submitted it all the time, but never taken an aggregate look at the entire report. After those reports came out, we did. And so what we had said is that we're not a Maricopa County who can pay for a Superior Court building that costs $500 million on a pay-as-you-go basis because of the way that taxes are raised in that particular community. And historically, we've been a community that pays for our infrastructure on a bond program with a short return period or payback period of 15 years. We then, in this program, highlights the what I call multi-jurisdictional nature of the program, in the sense that it is a countywide tax base that's paying back this debt. So therefore, it was always basically assumed that it should be for projects that benefit everyone in the community, including every jurisdiction. And so when we then began looking at the overlapping debt of the jurisdictions versus the county, it's true that our county is $1,000 per capita, but if you then go up to, we'll say, Maricopa County and look at one of the cities like Phoenix, it's over $4,000 per capita. And so that we felt a lot better at that point in time. And I think the other thing that is good for Pima County is that we've always adopted, either out of historical practice or just simply we are stubborn, a debt repayment period that never exceeded 15 years. And so we were not one to go 20 and 25 or 30-year debt periods, because we were trying to optimize the actual repayment and the ability to go back out and ask the voters for more bond debt and keep the tax rate relatively level. So that's been the strategy. And when we first heard this discussion about debt, we began to take a look at it, got a little concerned. But then when we looked at the nature of the program and what we fund, the short debt period, and the debt of other jurisdictions, even in Pima County, we became very unconcerned. Donald.
You recognize Michael, so you have to recognize me.
Okay.
I have to leave early, and I apologize to everybody, but this gentleman there, and I don't know you, but at least you and I think alike. What I'm concerned about is, first of all, this committee is the most important committee we have. I told that to Ms. Davenport, and we rely upon it all the way through, and I'm very proud of this, of how they work, even though I don't agree with them. But really what I came down about is Miranda and then the state legislators, which were the ones that I unfortunately voted for. I think Miranda made a big mistake, and I have the land there, so when they read this, I can, get a little bit of flashback. But the fact is that I thought they were out of line from what they did when they went to the state legislators. Then when they went to the state legislators, I called all of them and told them that it's the wrong way to do it, that they should come in, take a look at themselves and see what they're talking about. That didn't work. They went up to the state, they talked to the president of the Senate, Chairman of the House and to Jane, to the governor. I called all of them and told them it was wrong. I also had and asked her to call Ms. Davenport and warn her something's coming down that she cannot control, that she has to do it, but that it would set us back a while. And so I'd like to have the record show that doing government that way, what Miranda did, got our state legislators up there to go forward with it and get it through, is not the way that we should govern, and it's not the way that I think that anybody wants to govern, although some other gentlemen certainly can sort of defend Miranda. But I just wanted to voice my opinion. I don't like that. I don't think it's good for us. And I think this organization, this committee is one of the very best we have. And with that, I'll leave. And I hope I don't meet Ms. Davenport again.
Thank you, Donald. We'll hope this is a blip on the radar screen. Richard.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't entirely on the schedule, but if it's okay. Sure. Yeah. I'm Richard Elias, and I'm the District 5 Supervisor. And so I just wanted to say a couple words to make a few points here because I think they're important. Draw everybody's attention to the county seal. And that was designed by Hector Morales, who was a city councilman and a county supervisor at different points in his career. But that's San Javier Mission, and that's the place people have come to worship the longest here in our beautiful county. And I would say that when I read the draft, I went there to light a candle to say thank you. Okay? Because this is a very difficult program. It's complicated, and so we were surprised to see such a good audit come through. I think that that is number one, most important. Secondly, I'm glad to see that Tucson's getting a good bang for its buck in particular because the vast majority of my residents live in the jurisdiction of the city of Tucson. That said, that may not be the best way of looking at a bond program and determining its overall success or that it's doing the right thing, but it is an important way of looking at things. So I think we have to have some balance in all of that. And then the third thing I would say is that, you know, I understand Mr. Diamond, and I'm glad he said the things that he said a minute ago, but frankly, I think our job is to do right and to govern the best way possible. And so hard feelings, none exist here in this supervisor's heart. We are all about doing business correctly, and I think Mr. Huckleberry does that, and I'm proud of him. And I'm proud of our government, I'm proud of our staff. Used to be one of them. And so our thing is all about putting the best foot forward and not assessing blame about how any of us might go about doing business in a political venue like the state legislature. Third thing I would like to say is that when I began my employment in Pima County, I was not a county supervisor, but I was a member of staff. And the group that I was assigned to was named the CIP unit, which is the Capital Improvement Projects unit. And our leader at the time was a gentleman named Don Spees, who put together a lot of the information that the auditors came to depend on in making this audit, if I'm not mistaken. And Don did an excellent job of doing that, and we all thought it was as repetitive as hell, to be quite honest with you. But it showed the wisdom that our administrative folks had shown to that point, and Don, being the West Point grad that he is, and excellent person that he is, he did a good job of compiling that information so that we had something to go back to. And that's something that we should all be real proud of and shows that Pima County does things the right way. So that's really the sum of my comments, but I thank everybody for coming today and listening to all of this.
Just one last comment. The only regret I have about the audit was that it didn't respond to the most grievous allegation made about the committee that we were all totally under the thumb of the county administrator. So just to answer that, I would invite anybody here to attend the next meeting of the bond committee and see what a cantankerous, independent, rambunctious group we are.
I think when Keith attended one of our meetings and heard us the committee argue for an hour over a subject, he clearly understood that you're pretty independently minded.
Chuck, the one thing I would say, and I won't comment on what Mr. Diamond had to say, whether I agreed or disagreed, but I think the audit does one thing, and that confirms that the bond program that the Board of Supervisors has created includes several layers of citizen oversight, checks and balances, and provides valid assurance that the taxpayers' money are being spent the way that the voters intended it to be spent. And I think that's the real message here, that we do have a system in place that the voters can be confident in, that all of the people in Pima County can be sure is being run correctly. And I think that's the real message here. It's not one jurisdiction against another, it's that the system works and it works very effectively.
That's true. Okay, Michael, and one more and more.
One more very quickly. Also during the debate last year, there was an enormous amount of discussion, and I know this wasn't part of the Auditor General's mandate to look at, but it was certainly part of the legislative debate, and it was something Pima County actually supported. There was a lot of discussion of voter-approved debt versus non-voter-approved debt, because there are mechanisms that municipalities and counties can use to assume debt that's not voter-approved. And again, just because it was such a point of discussion there, it may be worth touching very briefly on these programs, your proportion of voter-approved debt versus non-voter.
Yes, and I think when you look at the county's debt, a majority, probably I would say close to 85% of it is voter authorized, because that's GO bond authorization, that's highway user revenue obligations, to the point that it's still issuing sewer revenue bonds. Those were authorized. The obligations are not. Typically, certificates of participation, lease purchases are not voter approved, but our debt in those areas is minuscule compared to our general obligation or our highway user revenue. So I would say that probably a good 85% of the debt that Pima County has is voter authorized. It has a life of 15 years. Our certificates of participation that we actually issued have very short-term life, and I would say on average about 3 to 4 years, because it's used as a mechanism just to bridge certain high-demand capital needs, but paid back very quickly. Other jurisdictions we've seen issue certificates of participation or municipal property corporation leases over 25-year periods, and those are not generally voter authorized. So they're kind of this hidden debt instrument, at least the public doesn't get to go in and vote on. So with that, what I'm going to do is very quickly thank the Auditor General and her staff, Jay and Keith. And Debbie, thank you for actually coming down and making this presentation, because I think it's very helpful to the committee to see and hear what you've concluded. So we very much appreciate your efforts and all the efforts that it took to get this audit completed. And so thank you for coming.